You're listening to the Everything Jewish 10 Minutes at a Time podcast, where you'll learn about every Jewish topic imaginable in about 10 minutes. And before we dive in, I have to say my standard apology. Hebrew words sometimes come out of my AI-generated mouth sounding like your Bubby's blender when it's stuck between chop and liquefy. In other words, not exactly smooth. So if I pronounce Hosea as if I'm sneezing or like I'm ordering Italian pasta, just know it's not intentional. Thanks for bearing with me and keeping your sense of humor intact. Today's topic is the Book of Hosea. Now, Hosea is part of a collection known as the 12 Minor Prophets. Minor doesn't mean less important. It's more like fun-size candy bars compared to the king-size versions of Isaiah or Jeremiah. The chocolate is just as good, but you don't need two hands to hold it. Hosea is short, sharp, and emotional. And in some ways, it delivers one of the most dramatic prophetic messages in the entire Hebrew Bible. So let's set the scene. Hosea lived in the 8th century BCE in the northern kingdom of Israel. This was a time when politics and religion were in absolute chaos. Imagine living in a country where your leaders are corrupt, alliances with other nations are constantly shifting, and foreign empires are circling like hungry sharks. That was Hosea's world. The northern kingdom had wealth and power, but it also had a spiritual and moral crisis. People were worshiping idols, making shady deals with neighboring powers, and ignoring the covenant they had with God. If this were a TV show, it would be something between Game of Thrones and House of Cards, with lots of backstabbing, betrayal, and dramatic monologues. Hosea enters this story not just as a preacher wagging his finger, but as a man whose personal life becomes the centerpiece of his prophetic message. And that's where things get truly intense, because God doesn't just give Hosea words to say. He gives him a whole life story to live out as a metaphor. Here's the jaw-dropping part. God tells Hosea to marry a woman named Gomer, who is unfaithful to him. Yes, her name really is Gomer, which sounds more like the sidekick on an old sitcom than the star of a tragic biblical drama. But this is no comedy. Gomer is portrayed as repeatedly unfaithful, chasing after other lovers. Their marriage becomes the living, breathing symbol of Israel's relationship with God. Israel, like Gomer, has been running after idols and foreign gods, ignoring its covenant and forgetting where true loyalty lies. Hosea, heartbroken but committed, mirrors God's role, calling his spouse back, forgiving her, and trying to restore the bond. Imagine reality television where a couple goes through betrayal, heartbreak, and reconciliation. But this isn't for entertainment. It's for prophecy. Hosea's marriage becomes the message. Instead of giving abstract sermons, Hosea shows the people, this is what you've been doing to God. You're betraying him like Gomer betrayed me. It's vivid, messy, uncomfortable, and unforgettable. Exactly what a prophetic wake-up call is supposed to be. Why use a marriage metaphor? Because Hosea wants people to understand that this isn't just about rules and rituals. This is about a relationship. God isn't a distant king in the sky handing down decrees like corporate memos. God is portrayed as a spouse, loving, loyal, and deeply hurt by betrayal. When Israel worships idols, it isn't simply breaking a law, it's breaking God's heart. Think about being ghosted by someone you trusted, or finding out your partner was secretly cheating. That raw, human pain, that's the emotional imagery Hosea taps into. He wants people to feel the sting of disloyalty and then realize that this is how God feels when they run after other gods. The metaphor also works because marriage isn't just a one-time event. It's an ongoing relationship that requires commitment. Hosea paints the covenant between God and Israel as a living bond that needs nurturing, loyalty, and trust. It's a radical way to think about religion. Not just commandments carved in stone, but a love story that can break or heal depending on how faithful people choose to be. Now, Hosea's book doesn't just wallow in pain. Yes, there's plenty of criticism of Israel's corruption, idol worship, and moral failures. But there are also moments of breathtaking tenderness. Hosea describes God as planning to lead Israel back into the wilderness, not as punishment, but as a kind of reset. Think of it like hitting the relationship restart button. God wants to bring Israel back to basics, away from the noise and distractions, almost like taking a couple on a second honeymoon after a messy fight. It's both romantic and symbolic. Hosea's God isn't just about punishing. He's about healing, restoring, and giving second chances. Some of Hosea's most beautiful imagery is about reconciliation. God says, "I will betroth you to me forever," promising love and renewal. In the middle of all the warnings, you find poetry about hope. It's like binge watching a drama series where the darkest betrayal is followed by a scene of forgiveness that makes you cry. Hosea insists that broken relationships can be repaired, and that's as true for a people and their God as it is for two spouses. One of Hosea's most famous lines is this: "I desire mercy, not sacrifice." This is the mic drop moment of the book. In the ancient world, sacrifices at the temple were essential. But Hosea flips the script. He says God values compassion, kindness, and mercy more than ritual offerings. Imagine someone bringing flowers after forgetting your birthday, but still not bothering to listen or care about you the rest of the year. The flowers don't fix the relationship. Hosea's point is the same. Don't think you can make a ritual sacrifice while ignoring the bigger picture of justice, mercy, and love. That line became incredibly influential in Jewish thought and was even quoted in later traditions outside Judaism. Hosea redefines religion as something not limited to ceremonies, but rooted in how we treat people every day. It's not about checking boxes on a divine to-do list. It's about whether you're merciful, compassionate, and faithful. Hosea's message is timeless, like a tweet that goes viral because it says in 10 words what we all need to hear. Hosea's imagery didn't just stop with his own generation. For centuries, Jewish thinkers, poets, and commentators leaned on his metaphors to make sense of exile and redemption. His unfaithful spouse metaphor wasn't only about ancient Israel. It became a way of describing the Jewish people's ups and downs with God throughout history. During exile, when Jews felt abandoned or punished, Hosea's words reminded them that God's love wasn't gone forever, that forgiveness and renewal were possible. The prophet's story was retold in new ways in every generation, helping people frame their struggles and hopes. Even today, when Jewish communities talk about teshuvah, or return, during the high holidays, you can hear echoes of Hosea's voice. The idea that God is waiting to reconcile, no matter how far you've strayed, has been a source of strength across centuries. Hosea transformed his own painful marriage into a symbol of resilience, reminding future generations that love, even divine love, can endure betrayal and come back stronger. His message is about restoration as much as it is about warning. Of course, Hosea raises some uncomfortable questions. Why would God tell a prophet to go through such a painful marriage just to prove a point? Some rabbis believed the marriage was symbolic, not literal, more like a vision acted out than an actual lived experience. Others believed prophets often lived their messages in extreme, dramatic ways, and Hosea's suffering was part of his role. Either way, Hosea shows us something important. Prophets weren't just fortune tellers predicting the future. They were living, breathing symbols. They were performance artists of the ancient world, embodying the message in unforgettable ways. Hosea didn't just say, "You're being unfaithful to God." He showed it by living through betrayal himself. That's why his words cut so deeply. They were grounded in his own pain and experience. Being a prophet was never a cushy job. It meant sacrifice, ridicule, and personal struggle. Hosea's story reminds us that prophecy was about shaking people awake, sometimes with words, sometimes with actions, and sometimes with the messy reality of a prophet's own life. So what does Hosea have to teach us today? A lot. In our world, loyalty often feels optional. People switch jobs every 2 years, swipe left or right through relationships, and jump from one brand to another depending on the sales. Hosea's message cuts through the noise. He tells us that faithfulness matters, whether to God, to loved ones, or to communities. When Hosea says God desires mercy, not sacrifice, it's like telling us not to hide behind rituals, hashtags, or grand gestures. Don't just post about kindness. Actually be kind. Don't just show up at services or ceremonies. Live the values in your daily choices. And when relationships break down, Hosea's message is that brokenness doesn't have to be final. Renewal, forgiveness, and restoration are always possible. That's a message for marriages, friendships, and communities. In an age of disposable everything, Hosea reminds us that commitment, compassion, and mercy are worth more than any sacrifice. His book may be ancient, but it feels like it was written for the modern scroll, whether it's parchment or Instagram. And that brings us to the close of today's episode. Hosea might be labeled a minor prophet, but nothing about his message is minor. His story is raw, emotional, and deeply human. Through his painful marriage and prophetic words, Hosea shows us that our relationship with God isn't just about following rules. It's about love, loyalty, and compassion. It's about the heartbreak of betrayal and the joy of reconciliation. Hosea reminds us that mercy matters more than ritual, that forgiveness is always on the table, and that even broken bonds can be rebuilt. That's why his words still resonate thousands of years later across cultures and generations. Thanks so much for listening to the Everything Jewish 10 Minutes at a Time podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, do me a favor, forward it to a friend who might enjoy it, or leave a positive review so others can find the show. Until next time, keep learning, keep laughing, and maybe don't name your child Gomer unless you're really, really committed to explaining it at every parent-teacher conference.